everyone. I'm trying to see if I can see everybody in the room, kind of picking that view where I can grab everybody. But I apologize if there's a few folks. I think I got it. Okay, here we go. Yep, I think I see everyone. Hi, well, welcome. I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Betsy Montañez. I've been with FDM Group for a little over a year as a university partnerships manager responsible for talent acquisition on our college campuses and other educational institutions throughout the US. But prior to that, I spent the majority of my professional career in higher education, working for 4-year private institutions, 4-year public institutions, and 2-year community college. So I'm going to start out really quickly by saying I am by no means an expert on this. I joke because if I had all the answers and all the solutions, I'd be paid a lot more. And I'd be probably touring the country telling every company how to solve their DE&I issues. But what I have found throughout my education, throughout my studies, I do have a master's in counseling with a concentration in mental health and student affairs. And with my work predominantly in the military community, working with so many different variables in there, that I found myself becoming a DE&I champion without even realizing it, because it became very intuitive for me. And I found out early on that it was really important to have all the voices heard throughout when we're having these conversations. And so I'm not going to bore you to death with PowerPoint. I do want to go around super duper fast because I just want to get an idea of who I have in the room. So Beverly, if you would mind just letting me know really quickly what I need to know about you.
I am Beverly Moore. I identify as she, her. I work for Charles Schwab. I've been there a few years now and have a long career. I'm at the tail end of my career growth.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining. And Grace?
Hi, everyone. I am Grace. You might see me on LinkedIn as Stacy Fenton because Stacy is my legal name, but Grace is the nickname I go by. I go by she, her, they, them pronouns. I've also gotten experience through higher education for my master's program and then doctoral coursework. So I totally understand student affairs and all that stuff. And I'm here because I want to know more about diversity and inclusion in technical spaces.
Great. And Jennifer?
Guys, how are y'all doing? My name is Jennifer Carroll. I'm the CEO of Varuna. We're an insurtech startup. I wouldn't say based out of Austin. We have employees across the country. We have a completely remote workforce. So on top of trying to achieve a diverse workforce, including in the technical fields, which is quite a challenge, we also have to do it remotely. So I'm excited to hear what you have to share today. If you guys can really kind of get into kind of tips for someone like me that doesn't have as much support as some of the larger organizations about ways that we can really encourage, like recruit diverse folks, as well as create some sort of like mentorship or program around making sure that we're retaining our diverse talent and showcasing them in front of the rest of the company. We do have a few like African-American product people and developers, and of course the company's women-led. So
awesome. Great. Thank you so much for sharing. Christina?
Can you hear me?
Yes, can.
Cool. I'm Christina. I use she, her pronouns. I just graduated from UT's Full Stack Web Development Bootcamp. And so now I am on the job search and yeah.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing. And if I'm mispronouncing your name, please correct me. Is it Janice?
Yes, it is Janice. I go by the pronouns she, her. I work for the city of Austin and I've been there quite a while, but I'm taking a new direction in my IT field. And I'm in college right now working on a computer science degree. So also
Fantastic.
also an Army veteran.
Oh, thank you for your service. And Shay, last but not least.
Yeah, hi, I'm Shay Cuthbertson. I am she, her, and I am the programs director for AWT. And I do IT staffing during the day, and I'm always looking to increase in any direction besides white male and tech. So,
Great.
perfect. And then I love this topic for our events. We just did one a couple months ago, and it was great. If anyone needs additional resources after this, the recording is available as well. But looking forward to tonight, Betsy.
Great. Well, I'm a firm believer of giving your audience what they want. So I know that I have a couple things prepared, but we can definitely take this conversation into whatever direction the conversation takes us into. I did want to start, though, really simply with, what is diversity, equity, and inclusion? And so I usually do a poll and stuff, and I just don't have that ability today. So I guess by a show of hands, how many of you feel very comfortable, very knowledgeable about diversity, equity, and inclusion? So if I had to say on a scale from 1 to 10, how many of you feel you're a 7 and above? Okay. How about, let's say, a 4 to 6? Okay, that's fair. And then 4 and under. Thank you, Denise, for the hand. I love it. Fantastic. So I don't believe in reading slides to folks. So, well, that's not true, actually, I do. So, but I'll go through these really quickly. So diversity, right, in its simplest forms, is all the ways in which people differ. Equity is the fair treatment, access, opportunity, and advancement for all people. And as a matter of fact, I believe I just put on, yep. And inclusion. A variety of people have power, a voice, and decision-making authority. And so when we think about diversity, we've started really looking into it as companies, as culture, as communities. We're starting to really look at what diversity actually means. It's not linear, it's not up and down, it's not black and white, right? It's ever evolving, it's lots of pieces. So just taking a look here, age, disability, gender, family status, religion, belief, and spirituality. What are some other ones that you think are missing from this board that, all these pieces together? Anyone want to share some?
Amount of education.
Yeah, absolutely. So education is one of them, lack of or how much education you have. Anyone else? I'm sorry, Grace?
I was going to say socioeconomic status.
Absolutely. Socioeconomic status for sure.
Sexuality.
Yeah, so we have gender identity and expression, and we have gender, but absolutely. So we can, diversity could even go from political views, citizenship, union affiliation, right? So depending on who's in which role within our company, all of that is what diversity makes up of. And it really makes us start thinking about intersectionality, right? Because the other thing is, so we have some folks here today. We have one veteran, but she may also identify with another piece of this. I always share with folks, myself, my last name is Montañez. I am of Latin descent. But when folks ask me, how do you identify? That's usually not one of the things I lead into. I usually introduce myself and say, I identify as a female woman athlete. I feel that that's, for me, women's empowerment is very, very important on the forefront, and being a veteran advocate and part of the military community. And that doesn't mean I'm not proud of my Latina heritage and all of that, but we all have our own way of identifying, right? And so another thing that I like to point out about diversity is to keep in mind tokenism and being careful that we're not giving people their identity, but we're asking them, how do you identify? So we're not making that assumption for them. So then we talk about equity, right? And there's a big difference between equality and equity. quality is typically defined as treating everyone the same. And equity is really referring to those policies and practices that we need to put in place to make sure that everybody has that same opportunity. So keeping in mind, equality is about sameness, equity is about fairness. And then finally, we get to the inclusion aspect. So we have exclusion, and I love this picture because it just puts it so easily in the simplest of terms in this visual, right? We have exclusion. We know what that looks like when everybody's outside and we're not, bringing them into the fold. Then we have integration, right? And so, yeah, they're here, but have we really included them? Have we made them part of the process, essentially, right? And so we have to understand that there's a big difference between integration and inclusion. An example might be women may be well represented at senior management level, but due to longstanding gender norms, we still see salary discrepancies and a lot of other different factors. So that's the difference between integration and inclusion. So when we're talking about DE&I, we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so from our topic, I'm going to dive right into it, right? How do we include folks into the conversations? And so I have a couple things I want to prompt you all. We're going to have those conversations right now. And so I'm going to throw out some topics and I want to see what you guys have to say about these topics, keeping in mind diversity, equity, and inclusion. So if I said to you, we're going to have a Christmas party this December and you're all invited. Let me hear some thoughts and feelings about that.
Not everyone celebrates Christmas.
Absolutely. Not everybody celebrates Christmas.
I think there's the assumption too that everyone knows what Christmas means.
Fantastic. Absolutely. Yeah. So how do we, as the folks in our company trying to create this diversity, equity, and inclusion, this not necessarily a safe space, but a brave space for everyone? What are some of the conversations we can have with folks when, or maybe our leaders who are presenting this Christmas party?
Maybe changing the name to a holiday party or end of year party.
Great.
New
Yeah.
Year party, or, yeah.
I'm seeing a lot of end of the year party nods, right? Yeah, or winter. I've called winter party, right? Because even holiday, for me, it's not a holiday necessarily. So we want to really start focusing on that neutral language, right? Because words do matter. Absolutely. So that was an easy one. I'm going to throw a curveball at you. Company travel policy. So our company travel policy is as follows. If we weren't on Zoom, I would have been flown down to Austin to meet with y'all. And that would have been very exciting for me, a trip out of New York City. And then I would have had to turn in all my receipts and be reimbursed. How can this become problematic?
Some don't have money to travel or
from the expenses.
Financial obligations.
Right, absolutely. So there's a socioeconomic disparity here as well that a lot of folks sometimes overlook. And I'll be honest, and I'll share with you all, that happened to me. I was sent on a trip and I didn't have that type of credit limit at the time for whatever my personal reasons were. And I did go to my dean at the time and I explained to him, and he sent an email to about 15 people throughout the school I was working at. Betsy doesn't have a high enough credit limit. And so how can we, and I was mortified, right? And I was young, I was school loans, whatever the reason is, I messed up my, whatever, it didn't matter. And I had to go find someone that would added me to their credit card so I can use their credit card for travel purposes so that I would never be embarrassed again. Right. So these are just some of the conversations. We can talk about working from home. Everybody, either loves it or hates it or in between. But what are some of the conversation starters that we need to start looking at when we're talking about working from home?
I think about ableism, and I used to be blind. I remember how difficult it was using my computer, even after having time as a software developer. I just had to learn a whole new set of skills, and working from home would require not just mastering those skills, but being able to interact and communicate with people on platforms that aren't made for people with visual disabilities. So I would definitely ask questions about how are we making sure this is accessible for everybody.
Love it. Anyone else?
Well, using COVID as an example, and children not going to school, but not everyone has the means to have full-time help with children in the home.
Right.
And yeah, that makes for a very different working from home experience.
Right. And we know that that disparity, we know statistically, has affected more women than men. Even if there is both a female and male figure that identify as a mother and father, or two adult parents, right? It will affect one adult parent over the other adult parent, because there's always one person who primarily takes that responsibility. So we've seen that as well. Absolutely. What about from a socioeconomic standpoint? How can working from home create disparity?
It assumes that you have a place where you can work, that you have a desk, that you have, internet.
Absolutely.
There. I mean, I know we faced that actually with a lot of our straight out of college kids who had just on their own and we're in a tiny little place, didn't have a lot of stuff. They had Wi-Fi, but they
Right.
have
Yeah, but you're absolutely right, Beverly. We're assuming everybody has tech. We're assuming everybody has a workspace. We're also assuming that everybody has a safe space to even work. And this is a conversation that we had within the school system too, because we had so many students that were in and out of shelters, and they were now Zooming into class. And teachers are insisting that they have their cameras on. And now other students, right? So yeah, great. I'm welcoming you to my home. But what if my home is not up to whatever standard is expected in that classroom or in your workforce, right? So a lot of these things haven't been taken into consideration. So another topic I have here is COVID-19, and I know we kind of hit that, but I'm curious to gauge from you all, now that we've kind of laid the groundwork for this, what are some other types of conversations where you all can start making sure that all voices are being heard, that we're taking into consideration everyone when we're making these policy decisions in our companies?
So there's an example through my husband's company. He works at Toyota, and they didn't require everybody to get vaccinated. They made it available, and some people felt like, oh, this should have been a requirement. I'm Black, and I come from a lineage of people who were slaves. And I know a lot of things about how Black people have been experimented on involuntarily in the medical industry, and how there are some people in the Black community to this day that do not want to get vaccinations because they feel a certain cautiousness, reticence for what had happened previously to our ancestors. So all that to say, I'm not anti-vax, but there are some people who legitimately have some reasons. And so I don't think that there should be these ubiquitous, everybody has to get vaccinated policies. There should be a way where people can still feel safe when they go to work.
Right. Absolutely. Anyone else want to?
I was going to say, one of the things that we're seeing, we have a large Indian population in our tech community, and so many of them have been impacted with family members at home, or they're one step, not even always one step removed from the situation. We've had people pass in this process, especially lately. So I think there's a compassion and an emotion that needs to be considered there. We're not experiencing it the same way that people who are native from India and who have families there are experiencing it.
Right.
There's a lot of sensitivity.
Oh, absolutely. COVID-19, we've learned there's a disparity in who is affected more by COVID-19, right? Persons of color have unfortunately suffered greater deaths. And the other thing too, I keep in mind and I pose to companies is, you know, how are you considering the mental health of your staff through COVID-19? Because to your point, we're not all being affected the same. Grace, you brought up something about the vaccination and you know, the Tuskegee experiments and all of that. And that's real. That's a real emotion that's being brought up. And so it's very easy to pass blanket policy and not consider these raw emotions that are still there. And so, you know, this even brings on conversation about performance review. Are we going to use the traditional methods of performance review for all of our folks? I am in New York and I have FDM has offices in Austin, Texas, and Arlington, Virginia, and Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm actually from the Queens area, which was the epicenter of the US. And, you know, I shared with my direct report, but I lost 7 people, including my father-in-law and parents of my best friend, both mother and father, within a month. And a 25-year-old, my friend's youngest brother, who was 25. So I saw from young to old and everything in between. And, you know, that affects me very differently than maybe somebody that hasn't seen that, you know. And so, yeah, absolutely. These are all real things. And I think one of the things that we have to remember when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion is also mental health, because that's part of that diversity, whether it's neurodiversity or even just how we process emotions. You know, what's going on in Nepal, what's going on in India could affect us all very differently as well. And again, that's part of that inclusiveness. So yeah. So you guys all passed. So we kind of nailed all of these, right? So open dialogue equals creative solutions. We talked about the Christmas party, how it celebrates and promotes Christianity, how it alienates other faiths or folks who don't have faith. So we talked about creating neutral names for events, right? And that's a great indicator of using neutral language. What are some other creative solutions? I threw the one up of maybe allowing for floating holiday time off, because my holiday might not be your holiday. So great, we all get off for Christmas break, but that's not my holiday. And so now, you know, I'm okay working on Christmas. Can I have that holiday time? So that's what I mean by floating time off. And I think as we start having these open dialogues where it's okay, where folks aren't necessarily rolling their eyes and saying, oh, here we go again, we have to accommodate, instead of saying, great, how can we make this equitable for everyone? That's how we start really creating an inclusive environment. Company travel, we talked about paying upfront versus reimbursement. Working from home could be anything from providing support for tech fees, because not everybody can afford internet, to instituting virtual backgrounds so that everybody's seeing the same thing and you're not seeing where my home situation may be, which I may not be comfortable with sharing, right? And then COVID-19, we talked about vaccine access disparity, immune compromised. Right now, that's a big conversation we're having in our offices. You know, mask mandates have been lifted, but only if you're vaccinated. But who's checking? What about the folks that are immune compromised in the office? Don't they have the right to feel safe in their workspace as well? And so this is part of what being a diverse team means. And a lot of times I think that when folks keep bringing up these conversations, especially women, we can be labeled as troublemakers. And you know what? I think that's okay. I think we need to be comfortable with being the troublemaker sometimes. And so creating company, you know, changing company culture happens from the top down. Absolutely. It happens with our leadership, but we all definitely have a responsibility and we all play our part in that. And so I started off by saying I'm not an expert in any means. And I share that with you because I think it's important to realize you don't have to be an expert to be a change maker. Okay, you can use your own experiences, you can be an advocate and an ally for others and start creating this change. And the truth is we all have to be in this together. There's also a couple other things that I usually share with folks. It's really not about being tolerant. It's about being accepted, right? Accepting others and their differences. And I always share with folks, you don't have to agree with it. You know, that's okay, but you should respect it. And so I think it's okay that there could be certain initiatives in your company that maybe you don't see eye to eye, but I asked people, how is it really affecting you negatively? And then they share with me, well, it kind of really isn't. I was like, then if it's making it easier for someone, if it's making them feel more comfortable and more happy in their workplace, then what's so bad about this initiative? And so I don't try to change their minds, but I try to make them realize what's the harm in being inclusive. So this is my action plan for you all. One, know the diversity goals and the vision of your company or your organization. I usually, when I work with students, I tell them to do this before they apply for a company, right? You want to kind of line up your mission and your values and your morals with that company as much as you can. But it's important to know what your company's diversity goals and initiatives are in order for you to be a supportive ally to them. Participate and support employee resource groups, ones that you identify with and ones you don't. I'm challenging you all to join a ERG that you don't necessarily identify with so that you can become more culturally competent, so that you can learn a little bit more about the folks that are working with you. And I'll also say that's a little bit of a two-way street too. I'll share an example. When I worked with my student veterans at one of the schools, we had an administrator come into the student veterans lounge, and he started asking questions of our veterans, and he didn't necessarily know how to word what he was looking for. So he made a comment to the effect of like, so what war were you in? And a couple of my veterans right away started rolling their eyes. Oh my goodness, I can't believe this person asked that question. And I said, okay, everybody slow your roll. You know, I was like, here's someone who came and wanted to know about you. So they didn't know how to ask. So instead of you chastising them, why don't you teach them the right way of asking the question so that, you know, you're not knocking them for the initiative of wanting to learn more about you. The truth is the gentleman was trying to ask, have you ever been deployed? But he just didn't know the terminology. And so my student veterans said, okay, you know what? Yeah, we're gonna take that approach. And they coached him through it. And then he went on to teach someone else and that's someone else, right? So I think sometimes it's very easy for us to get offended when folks are asking us questions, but we have to remember, where are they asking from? Are they asking out of true natural curiosity because they want to get to know me? So we have to look past the maybe you didn't word it properly. Maybe you were culturally insensitive when you asked that question. So not only am I going to teach you how to ask, but I'm going to explain it to you because you've made this full faith effort to learn about me. Become a mentor or mentee and look for folks not only that identify with you. So for me, that would be first generation college student, but look for folks that maybe, again, in that intersexuality that you can connect with. So I'm first generation female in my family. I might look for first generation, someone who identifies as male. I may look for someone who's in my major or maybe not. And also as a mentee, because I'm still learning from folks. So seek out people that you can learn from and teach. Understand your own diversity. Understand your story. And I hope that you're willing to share it, right? Because the more that we share, I always say, you know, again, using my veterans, I've worked in that community for so long. I used to tell them, if you don't share your story, folks are going to make assumptions and learn through television and movies. We already know how that works out. So I think it's important for us to share our own experiences, understand our own diversity, so folks can learn from the source and not make these presumptions and assumptions from, you know, sources that just aren't accurate, right? And finally, be a spokesperson, be an ally. And I think it's more powerful when, you know, I always say, when all the voices together have a common goal and they're all kind of look alike and they're all asking for the same thing, sometimes people don't pay attention. I guess, again, the best example I can say is like, if all the student veterans are asking for one thing, if all the Latino students are asking for something, right? Sometimes I find like administrations and folks, they just kind of start not so much listening. I think when allies join in, those voices become amplified. So when I'm saying, no, you know what? This is the right thing to do for the LGBTQ community. And I don't identify as such, but I'm an ally. All of a sudden that voice is amplified and we find out, okay, so these folks aren't necessarily trying to do things that are self-serving. This is just good for our community. So speak up and speak out for folks that maybe you don't identify with. And then I ask that everybody, you know, if we all start doing that, if we all start supporting each other, again, we're making more of that inclusive and equitable environment. And so I just have a quick quote that I wanted to share. If you're not familiar with Tony, he was actually the founder of Zappos. And, you know, this one always resonates with me. If you get the culture right, most of the other stuff will just take care of itself. You're going to see the productivity. You're going to see all of these things. You know, happy employees make for great work productivity. So why shouldn't we be inclusive? Why aren't we making sure that those folks are represented at the table? And if they're not, if there's not someone there in that conversation to speak up for that group, then again, be the ally, be the spokesperson, and speak for them if you can. So I know we had some other questions about recruitment and things of that nature, and I'm more than happy to dive into that as well. But I just wanted to see if there was any questions, comments, or additional concerns. I'm going to try to stop sharing my screen if I can figure out where that button went. Here we go. Okay.
I was wondering if, Grace, could you talk a little bit about what you were sharing in chat? Your thoughts that you were sharing in chat.
So I wrote two things, just cautionary notes, right? It was mentioned that we should be the troublemaker, the person that like speaks up and says something when we see things. And I think that being the troublemaker is a place of privilege itself. Because for people who come from underrepresented backgrounds, if they're seeing things and they're saying, okay, I see this thing happening, what can we do about it? It does two things. One, it could unfairly position them as the person who always brings up something's going on, which creates like an us versus them situation, which is very uncomfortable. And then the second thing is it puts unnecessary pressure on the person experiencing discrimination or whatever the situation might be. It puts that pressure on them to be the ones who act first and not the company. And I think this is probably the biggest blind site in diversity, equity, and inclusion rhetoric is it's a very much like, if you see something, say something. And I do think that should happen. I just think that it would be great if the focus was more on how do we empower those who have more privilege than others to act proactively in creating these safe environments versus waiting until someone brings it up to react and change.
Right. But I'm going to challenge you. How, if I don't have those experiences and nobody points them out to me, can I then be an agent of change? So again, as a Latina woman, I'm also underrepresented. And trust me, I have been that troublemaker and I have ostracized myself in points as well. So I totally agree with you. There's a balance, right? You know, you don't want to be portrayed as someone, you know, you don't want to affect your career necessarily as well. But at the same time, so this is why I look for those allies. I look for those folks. You know, I try to engage maybe people privately sometimes, because to your point, you could actually isolate yourself. So I agree with everything you're saying 100%. And I know we're looking at companies to create the change, right? But if no one understands, if no one's bringing up some of the challenges that could be faced internally, then companies don't know and can't make that change. Now, if somebody's bringing up these matters and companies aren't doing something about it, I think that's a different conversation, right? But we don't know what we don't know. And I think there's a lot of expectation of, well, you should just know, but how? Somebody has to teach me. And so I look at it and who's going to be brave to raise their voice and say, we need change in this aspect.
Yeah, I would like to respond to the question you put out there, which is how will we know if we don't have a context and know? There's many ways. I think a lot of companies have the option to hire external consultants to come in and ask those questions, even if it's just anonymous surveys that they ask throughout like a quarter or every 6 months. What's going on? How can we improve as a company? Things like that. There's many ways you can solicit feedback without putting someone in a position where they feel like they always are the person that's the target of something going on. It's just a matter of wanting to do that work and wanting to learn when you don't have to learn. And that's the reason why privilege is privilege, right?
Yeah. I love that you bring up surveys because I think it's so important when companies do take that step to be honest and open on those surveys. I think sometimes we tend to still even hold back in our responses there. And, and that's why it's really important for companies to make sure that those are anonymous so that we can speak freely. Because again, it's not just, there's so much diversity. There's so many moving pieces going on. And to really be able to, if your company's making that effort to give them the tools and let them know, hey, this is really what's going on, again, so that they can make that change.
Yeah, I mean, Grace, I can identify with what you're saying. I do think that there's a lot of good intended, but wrong directed diversity initiatives out there, like they kind of want to play lip service to it. So they set up an ERG or they do something that they think is moving the needle without actually hearing from their population of people that they're really trying to serve. And so I think it's both, right? They do need to take some action, and every major company has a diversity, officer out there whispering what they should do. But I do think we also need to hear directly from the people whose lives are most impacted by what's happening. And it is I wouldn't want to be the only one ever speaking up, but I'm just also the kind of person that can't not say anything. So I speak up all the time, as you can already tell. I think it's both have to happen is my point. You have to have both. Yeah.
And, and that's where dialogue is so important. And I know that we've been using these terms like safe space for such a long time. And we're starting to really talk about moving away from this idea of safe space, but really moving into what we call a brave space, where we are empowering folks to be their most authentic selves and feel free to speak however they feel fit, and not worry about those repercussions or anything like that. And how wonderful would it be if we could make all of our employers and all of our schools and all of these things a brave space for everyone, regardless of how you identify. And that might be a utopia, but I think it's a really great aim and something for us to reach for. And so, and again, I really feel that it starts with allyship. I think it's really important to listen to each other and then be able to say, okay, I understand where you're coming from,